so much for inviting me and for providing this opportunity to talk to people and raise solidarity. I know there is a lot for the movement in Iran. And well, Iran is not very, Iran is very familiar, I should say, to protests. This is not the first time. In the past, every decade we've had some, at least since 1979, that a revolution happened, and US and the West were kind enough to bring Islamists to us instead of freedom that people raised to bring about the regime change. Since then, almost every 10 years, there has been a protest in one part of Iran, and all through the first 10 years, we had a lot of protests, and then a lot of a whole kind of coup d'etat movement, taken thousands of leftists and opposition to jails. They say something about 100,000 were executed or killed under torture in 10 years, in the 80s. I don't know the exact number, but I wouldn't be surprised. Tortures were incredible. There are now some people who survived that trauma. They talk about it. You can't even listen to it. I mean, when they talk, I can't listen. Just imagine what you had to go through if you had to experience it personally. Even 10-year-old kids were executed, 12-year-old kids were executed. This was the whole situation. And then you had the armed struggle in Kurdistan. And then from then on, few years after people came out of the trauma of the 80s, especially the new generation who did not felt it personally themselves, the movement started. And from the beginning, women's rights movement, women's freedom and equality has been a big issue, a thorn in the eyes of the Islamic regime. Why do I say that? Because it's an Islamic regime. Islam, by definition, is anti-women's rights. Islam, by definition, is anti-women. It's a very misogynist ideology, and it's based on women being enslaved by their men, be it father, be it brother, be it husband, and you know about that. A lot of things happen in Islam. I don't want to talk about Islam here, and this regime came and really pushed his ideology very much firm into the ground. I am an Islamic regime. It was important. Why? Because there were a lot of leftists in Iran then. The left sentiments and aspirations was very strong. We had a very strong leftist movement in Iran. Part of it was anti-imperialist, and unfortunately, as it is now, anti-imperialist, as soon as we say death to the America, okay, yeah, you must be progressive. And this is what's happening now. If you see in social media, there are quite a few anti-imperialist lefts who think what's happening in Iran is all done by US, unfortunately. But then a populist leftist movement was somehow disarmed by Khomeini's death to America. So Islam was important as an ideology. So if Islam is important, then women have to be enslaved. Then veil has to be imposed on women, because veil is the symbol of Islam, is the flag of Islamic movement. Gender apartheid is very important. So these two, as two main symbols and elements of the dominant ideology, became very important. And what happened? From day one, women struggled against it. The first mass movement that happened in Iran was on 8th March 1979, only 2 weeks after the Islamic regime actually had got power. And it was not even completely in power. It was kind of a sort of, transition. The Shah had left, Khomeini had come, the government was not still in place. But why did this happen? Because I was one of them. We leftist women, we started having our organizations, and they were all leftist. Now people keep saying leftists were anti-women. That's just total lie. I know they were anti-imperialism. I know there was populism among the left. But everything that happened, at least in that first decade, was organized by Marxist, leftist women who created different women's organizations, and I was working with one of them. And we had organized our 8th March meeting for the first time, because for the first time we were free. At the time of the Shah, you could not have 8th March meetings. 8th March was a Marxist thing. It always has been. Now they're trying to steal it, but it started as a Marxist event, and it continued to be a Marxist event. So we, for the first time in history of Iran, as long as I know, maybe there were some things for 50 years before that, but it's not documented anywhere for me to know. The party might have done something, but in that sort of level, it was the first time. We were going to organize a powerful 8th March meeting. There were, like, in different universities in Tehran. Leaflets and posters were all over Tehran. At least I know, I lived in Tehran, that's what I know. I don't know about other cities. I know it happened, some things happened in some other big cities too. So what happened, Khomeini had a broadcast, 6 o'clock in the morning, and gave a mandate. All women working for public institutions and government had to observe the veil at work. Why? Because they saw that 8 March meetings, they had to do something, they had to push it back. They knew the first enemy wasn't left. The first enemy was communism and Marxism. They had to do that, and they knew that, so they did it. But what happened? At 7 o'clock in the morning, when women were getting ready to go to work, they heard the news. Instead of work, they went to the streets. It was incredible. In the center of Tehran, by the Tehran University, there were thousands of women shouting. You know, we had just were in a revolution, so shouting, demonstration, protest, being strong, being militant had become part of our psychology. It's very different. A revolutionary period, and you British people never had it. But we are going to the third one. So yes, we've had a lot, and thanks to Britain and US, they didn't let us have so they have to do it again. So that's what happened. People were very much psychologically, women were ready to shout for their rights. And one of the slogans that I never forget, and really sat with me that day, was, because that time was Cold War. Okay, so Soviet Union was called East. When I say East, I don't mean Middle East. East versus West. NATO, Warsaw. Okay, those two pacts. And Soviet Union was next door to Iran, so that always was a threat for NATO. Even though they had signed agreements that Iran belongs to the West, still there were all these problems. So Khomeini started shouting against the East and against the West. Death to the East, death to Soviet Union, death to the US. And so talking, Islam is this and that, and the Prophet has kissed the workers' hands and bowed again in front of them. I mean, all this bullshit about, how Islam is kind to workers and is kind and is... So what happened, a slogan that was just created on the street, or someone very creative created it anyway, it was, women's equality is neither Eastern nor Western, it's universal. It was the best response both to the regime and to the anti-imperialist left. It was, so that day, after that movement, all these women went to these meetings. There were meetings in 5 different, 2 in the University of Tehran, 1 in the University of Sharif, they call it now, and all the different places. The meeting I was organizing, I was one of the organizers, was just packed with these young girls from secondary school and universities, shouting slogans, shouting for their freedom. It was an amazing experience I had never seen in my life. And then after that, we had 1 week of movement. We had sit-ins, we had meetings, and we had gatherings, we had walkings, all of that. Finally, the regime had to back off. So, women's rights movement has organized the first mass movement, the protest movement against the regime, and has given it the first defeat. The first defeat this regime has tasted has been by the women's movement. So it took 3 years before they could actually bring the obligatory veil, and they did whatever they could do. Once they organized that coup d'etat I mentioned in 1981, in 22nd of June 1981, if I'm not mistaken, there was it was the regime itself, but it looked very much like a Pinochet coup d'etat in Iran, the way they sort of rounded up all the leftists and all the opposition and put it to jail. So this is what's going on. After that, every 10 years we've had different protests, but what you've always heard from the mass media here in the West has been people in Iran do not want to overthrow the regime. They don't want a different regime. They just want a little bit more free reforms. We had this coming to 2009. There was that big, huge movement, and after that, the regime knew the West is important, so it itself sent a lot of its own sort of state reformist activists abroad. They started working at the BBC, at the Voice of America, Radio Farda, which is again US. They started getting into human rights organizations, so they actually infiltrated the whole Western media and organizations and pushing the left, which had the main voice of opposition until 2009. The opposition in the West was with the left. But then they came, like Masih Alinejad, if you heard her name, this woman who just got a second prize with Zelensky. I don't know why she has to always get a prize sitting with Zelensky. What's between Zelensky and this woman? I don't know. But there are a lot of similarities, and one of them is they keep getting prizes from CIA. And this is again, she was one of the activists of the 2009. She actually was, I don't know if you know what Sire means. Sire is temporary marriage in Shia anyway. I don't know if Sunni has it too. And that means you can marry a woman from 15 minutes to 99 years. And doesn't matter how many wives you have, because you can have 4 wives, official, and then you can have as many as Sire you want. Sire is actually Islamic prostitution. That's what it is. Women who have no other way of supporting themselves, usually they're widows. They do that, or very poor girls from poor families. This is the way they can actually survive. And then men get them as Sire, as I said, from 15 minutes to 99 years. And she was one Sire, not because of money, for power, because she was a journalist. She was a Sire of a member of parliament in Iran, just before they sent her out here to work in the organizations. So, yes, now the narrative has changed. I have to be quick because we don't have much time. That now they talk about that people want to get rid of the regime. Once Biden says that, BBC says that, CNN says that, I know they want to do regime change. Not that people don't want to overthrow. They always wanted to overthrow. It's not the first time they want to overthrow. They just couldn't. But once they say, CNN talks about overthrow, BBC talks about overthrow, you know CIA and MI6 are thinking of overthrow. So this is how it goes. This is how the narrative goes. Regime change is on the agenda. Now, for Biden 2 days ago, people of Iran, we're going to free you. I said, please, Mr. Biden, we don't want your freedom. Just stay away. You've done it more than once. People can get rid of this regime themselves. But overthrow is on the people's agenda. No question about that. And this is not the first time. Another thing I'd like to mention is, of course, women's rights movement, or women's liberation movement, as I like to call it, is very important and is an important part of this movement. But it's not the only issue. But what you hear from the Western mainstream media is that's the only issue. Gender apartheid and gender subjugation, misogynism, they are very important issues, and we see it on the street. The role women and men together are playing. I'll give you a few examples. It's very important. But this movement is for freedom, equality and prosperity for all, even if they have very clearly shouting everywhere, freedom, equality. They don't only mean freedom and equality of the sexes or different genders, they mean freedom and equality general for everybody. This is the people are shouting on the streets very clearly, and workers are beginning to strike. The condition of the workers in Iran is horrible. 70% of the Iranian population in that rich country lives under the poverty line. And so that's another very important issue. People say it in their slogans everywhere. I mean, I don't have all the slogans here, otherwise I could have translated to you very clearly. So when you look at it, if somebody comes and just takes a picture, stands away and takes a picture of the movement, of the actions taking place on the streets, the slogans they shout, the way they fight, you know what you see? A very modern, very freedom-loving, equality-seeking socialist. Because this can only mean socialism, especially in the 21st century. You know now how the world has become. So if you want freedom and equality, that means you definitely have a very strong leftist a lot of the young people are leftist. But no, I'm not saying everybody on the streets has read Marx and all that. This is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about aspirations. I'm talking, like for example, one of the slogans which is very important and has created a lot of problems for the right-wing opposition and the West is this one: death to the oppressor, be it Shah, meaning king, we used to call Shah, or the leader being Khamenei. So they're saying no to the Islamic regime, no to the previous regime. They know they're going to bring the previous regime. So very clearly, they're so clear-minded, so sharp. I'm really, really surprised, because I was the young person in the 70s, in a revolution. My political mind, I was a leftist, I was a Marxist, but by no way could I see so sharply. Honestly. I was not one of the anti-imperialists. I luckily belonged to very Marxist, very progressive Marxist trend. You probably, some of you might have heard it. I was with Mansur Hekmat. Then he was not called Mansur Hekmat. We had a small organization. Even that, I could not see so clearly and so sharply as now young people are seeing and analyzing. And every day the new slogans tells you where they stand. Slogans are very important in a movement. This movement that's happening, as I said, has very strong leftist and socialist aspirations. I hope it can come to bearing. It also will play, I think it would be a second French Revolution of 1798. I don't know if any of you know what was important about that revolution. It was getting rid of religion. Fighting religion, bringing the church down, was the most important factor of the 1798. If I'm not mistaken, it was 1798, wasn't it? The Great French Revolution.
1789.
Sorry?
1789.
1789.
So it didn't solve France's problems, did it? Because
No.
Still so much
No. See, the thing is, it was a revolution in order to pave the way for capitalism.
Yeah, but
Can we have the discussion later? What I was trying to say, the effect of this revolution in Iran would be very similar to the French Revolution. Actually, it paved the way for capitalism to come. We want to get rid of capitalism, but then was 18th century, and it actually cut the hands of religion and church from the state. That's why, if you look at it, French is the strongest secular country in Europe or in the West or in the world, if you like. I think what will happen, Iranian revolution, if it comes to fruit, and I hope it will, would have the same kind of impact, at least in the Middle East, because what you see now, burning the veils on the streets, this is what's happening in Iran, burning the veils and throwing the turbans off mullahs' head. Have you seen any pictures? See, mullahs have this thing, turban, right? Mullahs, they're like the clergy. The young people go and throw it off. And then this has become these two symbols. But the symbols are important because it means people's attitude towards religion. Religion, Islam especially, for some time will have no real place in Iran. Still there will be people who pray and all of that. Of course, I'm not saying good. But nothing socially or politically as it had even before the Khomeini came to power. Even at the time of the Shah, the religion was very important part. Here, the Church of England is a very important part of the state, but since it's Western and it's democracy, it stands back. But still, everything happens in the church. In Iran, at the time of the Shah, religion was also very important, and the laws, the civil laws in the country were Islamic, but it did not have the power as it had later. And now, this, I think, would have a very important impact on the whole of the Middle East and the Islamic movement in the Middle East. But but what would they try to use now as an ideology? It would be nationalism. They try to create nationalism, the Cyrus, the Pasargad, the this and the that, and as though Iranians were the most important nation on earth, and trying to bring that so they can build the regime change on that. But as I said, I don't have much time. I have to finish it. There's a lot to talk about, the workers' and rights and so on and so forth. But one thing I like to say, that the women's liberation movement now in Iran is not women's movement. I like to make that difference. You have young men and young women together on the street shouting for equality and freedom. They hold hands and they dance around. They burn the veil together. They are together. So it's a women's liberation movement, not women's movement. So it's not only women. And that's the way also, again, in the West, they try to portray it as, and in this identity politics era, so women and then men subjugated, no, they're together in Iran. It's actually very different. So what they've done, I just say that, just to have a laugh, and then we continue. It's, they try to say it's women. So what they have done, something like 11, something like that, female foreign ministers have written a letter, a message, to express their solidarity with the women of Iran. Who are these women? The foreign minister of Canada, they're just going to Haiti. I don't know if you heard the news. Canada and US are going to Haiti for another coup d'etat. And Germany, Australia, New Zealand, and Libya. You know, when you look at it, they just say they're really trying to water down this movement as much as they can. These 4 countries that I mentioned, France, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand, these countries were important actors in ruining, destroying the Middle East in the 21st century. Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria. And Libya, I didn't even know they had a foreign minister, because there are 2 warlords, 2 warlords are running the country after NATO destroyed Libya. And they have a slave market in Libya. I don't know if you've heard it or not. They sell the refugees that they get to Libya, come to Europe for $400, $500. She is expressing solidarity with women's movement in Iran. So these are all the cards they're playing actually for the regime change. All I want to say is we have to express in solidarity with the Iranians and the revolutionary movements that are happening on the streets of Iran, and be very wary of the plans of regime change that the West is going to try to implement. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.